Picture this for a second. You are sitting in a high-stakes meeting.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's a massive client kickoff call, or, perhaps you finally secured a seat at the table for the quarterly leadership briefing.
Oh, that is always a stressful spot to be in.
Right. So you're leaning in, you're taking notes, feeling completely dialed into the conversation. And then, out of nowhere, the presenter drops an unfamiliar framework into the mix.
Yeah, or they confidently state some financial projection that just directly contradicts the strategy you all literally finalized last week.
Yes, exactly. And you look around,
Yeah.
and the rest of the room is just, nodding along. They look entirely unbothered. Meanwhile, you are completely lost. So what do you do in that exact moment?
I mean, it's the universal feeling of professional panic, right? Your heart rate spikes, the room suddenly feels very, very small, and you realize you have basically a split second to make a decision about how to handle your own confusion.
And usually, when you find yourself in that spot, you're staring down two equally terrible options. Option A is, well, the path of least resistance. You stay completely silent, try to blend into the wallpaper, and just pray you can figure it out later before the whole thing explodes in your face.
Which it always does.
It always does. And then option B is like the grenade. You raise your hand, bring the entire meeting to a screeching halt, and say those dreaded words, "I don't understand."
Ugh, yeah, you can almost feel your hard-earned credibility evaporating into the boardroom air the second you say that.
Totally. But neither of those paths actually serve you.
No, not at all. One leaves a ticking time bomb in your project timeline, and the other is basically an act of professional self-sabotage. It frames you as the weakest link in the room.
Right. So today, we are exploring a third option. For this deep dive, we're pulling some incredible insights from episode 5 of the show, Sharp English.
Oh, such a good one.
Yeah, the instructors on that show, Marcus and Zara, they dedicate an entire session to something that might sound niche, but is actually like a critical career-defining skill. And that's the art of asking questions as a leader.
It's so vital.
It really is. So our mission today is to equip you with the exact vocabulary you need to extract clarity from a confusing meeting, while actually elevating your professional standing in the process. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to start, we really have to dismantle that incredibly strong, almost biological instinct to just say nothing at all when we're confused.
Right, that freeze response.
Exactly. And in that Sharp English episode, Zara shares the story from her own career that just perfectly illustrates the hidden cost of staying quiet.
Oh, the consulting story.
Yeah, she was a junior consultant, barely in her second month on the job, sitting in this major client-facing workshop. And the client's head of strategy casually starts mapping out their next quarter using a methodology called Wardley mapping.
Which was, I'm assuming, a completely foreign concept to her at the time.
Completely foreign, but she looks around and her senior colleagues are just nodding thoughtfully. Every variable in that room is working against her.
Right, because she's the most junior person there.
Exactly. It's a high-pressure client environment, and everyone else seems perfectly fluent in this framework. So what does she do? She mirrors the room, she nods along, she actively chooses silence.
And let's trace the fallout of that single moment of silence, because it's brutal. Just because she didn't want to look uninformed at minute 15 of the kickoff meeting, she goes back to her desk and tries to, reverse engineer what the client meant.
Oh, no.
Yeah, she spends 2 entire weeks building a massive strategic deck based on her best guess of how this Wardley mapping was supposed to be applied to their deliverables.
That is 2 weeks of billable hours, just poured into a foundation of total guesswork.
Exactly. And when her manager finally reviews the deck 14 days later, they realize the entire premise is fundamentally flawed. The team has lost half a month of momentum.
Which is huge in consulting.
Massive.
Yeah.
And when the manager asks why she didn't just clarify the framework in the room, Zara admits her fear, right? She says she didn't want to look like she didn't know what was going on.
And her manager's response is the reality check we all desperately need. Not asking looked exponentially worse.
Yeah.
That narrative really highlights the fundamental trap of what we call the competence paradox. We falsely believe that silence acts as a shield, like it's protecting our reputation.
But it doesn't.
Not at all. In a professional environment, silence is never interpreted as neutral. People are constantly analyzing your presence, and they will read your silence in one of 2 ways.
What are they?
Well, they'll either assume you are in complete agreement with every flawed premise being presented, or, and this might be worse, they'll assume complete absence, meaning they think you're checked out, disengaged, and just adding zero value to the room.
Yeah. Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Marcus and Zara bring in some fascinating research from Harvard Business School that completely shatters our assumptions about asking for help.
Yes, the HBS study.
Right, because we walk into these meetings terrified that asking a question will make us look incompetent. Right? Like we're the ones slowing down the rest of the class.
Yeah. But what's fascinating here is how the Harvard data proves the exact inverse of our fears.
Tell me more about that.
So the researchers ran a series of experiments where individuals were tasked with difficult, complex problems. Think advanced brain teasers or like heavy mathematical puzzles.
Okay.
And these individuals were paired with partners. Some of those partners were explicitly instructed to ask for advice and clarification, while others were told to just remain silent and figure it out themselves.
So testing the Zara approach versus asking.
Exactly. And when participants were asked to rate the competence of their partners, they consistently rated the people who asked for advice higher than the ones who stayed quiet.
Wait, really? They perceived the question askers as more capable.
Precisely. We severely underestimate the psychology of engagement. Asking a well-crafted question signals that you care deeply about precision.
Oh, that makes sense.
And furthermore, it actually flatters the person being asked. When you ask a colleague to explain their reasoning, you are subtly acknowledging and validating their expertise.
That's a great point.
If we look at this through the lens of leadership, a leader's job is not to walk into a room serving as a walking encyclopedia that holds every single answer. A leader's job is to ask the probing questions that elevate the critical thinking of the entire group.
Wow, so staying silent to project intelligence is literally working against our own interests.
100%.
Okay, so that brings us to the actual mechanics of the words we choose. Because if asking questions is a recognized leadership trait, why does saying the phrase, "I don't understand," trigger such a, visceral feeling of failure?
Well, it comes down to the psychology of focus and ownership.
Right, I was thinking about this in terms of pulling the emergency brake on a speeding train.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, like when a meeting is moving fast, ideas are flowing, and you suddenly say, "I don't understand," you are yanking that emergency brake. The entire train violently jolts to a halt. Everyone is thrown off balance, and suddenly the entire room is staring directly at you, just waiting for you to catch up.
You've made the moment entirely about your personal deficit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Marcus and Zara offer a brilliant alternative that acts more like switching the tracks. The train keeps its momentum, but you gently guide it exactly where you need it to go.
And what's the phrase?
The phrase is, "Can you help me understand the thinking behind that?"
Oh, the psychological shift in that one sentence is just profound.
Right. Let's apply it back to Zara's nightmare scenario. Instead of halting the kickoff meeting to announce she doesn't know what wordly mapping is, she could just wait for a natural pause and say, "Can you help me understand the thinking behind applying wordly mapping to this specific phase of the project?"
Wow. Yeah, she instantly transforms from a junior employee struggling to keep up into a sharp, analytical professional probing the underlying strategy.
It's basically a magic trick.
It really is, because you are taking the focus completely off your own internal confusion and projecting it outward onto the idea itself. The listener's mental picture of you shifts from someone needing a remedial vocabulary lesson to a peer examining the structural integrity of a proposal.
That's so empowering.
And it is also an incredibly generous framing for the presenter.
How so?
Well, in high-stakes corporate environments, people are often operating in a mild state of fight or flight, right? Their ego is intrinsically tied to the ideas they present.
Oh, for sure.
So when someone hears, "I don't understand," their amygdala processes it as a communication failure on their part, which immediately triggers defensiveness. But when you ask them to explain their thinking, you bypass that threat response entirely. You're inviting them to showcase their logic.
I love that. And that concept of bypassing the defensive threat response is crucial for another heavy hitter phrase that Marcus and Zara highlight.
Which one?
Well, let's say a colleague proposes a new timeline. The numbers look decent on the surface,
Yeah,
but your gut tells you they are severely underestimating the engineering resources required.
happens all the time.
Right. And the instinct is to just say, "I'm not sure about that."
Mm.
But the instructors recommend saying, "I want to stress test that assumption before we go further."
Oh, stress test the assumption. Notice how analytical and depersonalized that sounds compared to the alternative.
Yeah, it really does.
When you say, "I'm not sure about that," you are injecting your own personal doubt into the room. It sounds like a direct challenge to the presenter's credibility. It's a status threat.
Right. It's very me versus you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But stress testing is a collaborative engineering concept.
Mm.
You are basically recruiting the presenter to sit on the same side of the table as you, looking at the idea together to ensure it's robust enough to survive the real world.
So you're applying necessary rigor without attacking their professional identity.
That's exactly it.
Okay. But that collaborative stress test works beautifully for evaluating a brand new proposal. But what happens when that goodwill completely evaporates? Because the presenter is actively contradicting a decision you all finalized in a previous meeting.
Ooh, the contradiction. That's tricky.
It is. Let's say last week you agreed the marketing budget was capped, and today someone is casually presenting a plan that exceeds it by $50,000.
Yeah, you cannot just stress test a $50,000 discrepancy.
Exactly. You have to correct the public record.
Hmm.
But if you jump in with, wait, that's not what we agreed on, you instantly start a turf war in front of the entire department.
All right, because you are actively cornering them. Even if they simply misspoke and they know they are entirely in the wrong, human nature dictates they will dig their heels in to save face publicly. Nobody wants to be called out like that.
So true. To navigate this, Marcus and Zara suggest framing the contradiction around your own cognitive process.
Okay, I like where this is going.
Yeah, you say, I want to make sure I'm connecting this correctly to what we agreed last time.
Ah. If we connect this to the bigger picture of corporate diplomacy, what you're doing here is providing a cognitive escape hatch.
An escape hatch, I like that.
Yeah. By presenting the glaring contradiction as your own inability to connect the dots, you completely remove the accusation of incompetence or deceit. You are playing the ultimate diplomat.
You're taking the blame for the confusion.
Exactly. You hand the other person a graceful way to say, let me clarify, and adjust their numbers back to reality. The outcome is exactly what you needed. The budget inconsistency is resolved, but the temperature in the room remains perfectly stable.
It's really about giving people a dignified way to correct their own mistakes.
Yes.
And that same philosophy applies when the problem isn't a contradiction, but rather, well, your own attention span.
We've all been there.
Right. We all experience cognitive overload. Like it's hour 3 of a marathon strategy session. You quickly check a Slack message from a client, and you suddenly realize you just missed the most critical deliverable date the speaker mentioned.
Oh, the worst feeling.
You absolutely cannot say, sorry, what did you say?
No, because that instantly broadcasts that you prioritize your inbox over their presentation. It's incredibly disrespectful.
Right. So instead, you signal intense focus. You say, I want to make sure I have that right.
Sure.
Could you say that once more?
That is brilliant.
Yeah. You are demanding the exact same repetition of facts, but you've fundamentally rewritten the narrative. You're no longer the person who's zoned out. You are the professional who recognizes the gravity of the information and demands absolute precision.
It is a phenomenal pivot.
It really is.
Sometimes, though, the threat in a meeting isn't just a missed fact or a slight contradiction. Sometimes you're sitting in a room, a major strategic pivot is being finalized, and you realize the entire premise is fundamentally flawed.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, you don't want to play the role of the resident pessimist or the roadblock, but you know that if you don't expose the crack in the foundation right then, the whole project will collapse in a month.
Okay, so how do we handle that?
This brings us to what the sharp English hosts call the consulting classic.
The consulting classic.
Yes. When you need the room to see a fatal flaw without directly pointing your finger at it, you ask, what would need to be true for this to work?
Oh, wow. What would need to be true for this to work?
Yes. It is an absolute masterclass in interrogating conditions. You aren't attacking the decision itself. You're inviting the entire room to pause and collectively build the hypothetical environment where this idea actually succeeds.
Okay, I see.
So if the necessary conditions for success, like, say, needing triple your current server capacity, or a regulatory approval that takes 6 months, if those aren't actually grounded in your current reality, the idea reveals its own impossibility organically.
That makes sense.
The group discovers the fatal flaw themselves, rather than you dictating it to them.
Okay, wait, I need to challenge this, because applying this in the real world feels incredibly risky depending on who you're talking to.
What do you mean?
Well, if a peer is pitching a new software tool, sure, I'll interrogate the conditions. But if the CEO is pitching their personal pet project, or the founder is outlining their grand vision for the next decade, asking what needs to be true for this to work sounds entirely too academic.
Like, it feels like I'm playing professor and treating their vision like a theoretical thought experiment. I mean, I would get thrown out of the room for sounding that detached.
You know, your radar is entirely accurate on that. Register and power dynamics dictate everything in corporate communication.
Right.
Using the blunt version of that phrase on a superior who is deeply emotionally invested in an idea can definitely come across as insubordinate or overly detached.
Exactly. So what's the fix?
To survive that dynamic, Marcus and Zara introduce a necessary softener. You simply anchor the philosophical question with a highly concrete parameter.
Give me an example of how that sounds in practice.
Sure, so instead of the broad sweeping version, you look at the CEO and say, what would need to be true for this to work at the timeline we're discussing? Or what would need to be true for this to work within our current Q3 operating budget?
Oh, that fundamentally changes the tone.
Doesn't it?
Yeah, by attaching the timeline or the budget, I am no longer challenging the validity of their grand vision. I'm stepping into the role of the pragmatic project manager. Precisely.
I am essentially saying, I share your vision, now let's solve the logistical puzzle of how we actually build it.
Yes, you ground their ambition in immediate practical reality. It allows you to expose the logistical flaws without ever bruising their ego or challenging their authority.
That is such a smart tweak. Okay, so those phrases brilliantly handle the complex strategic gaps. But I feel like the most vulnerable moments in a meeting are often when you just need to ask a really basic foundational question.
Oh, the obvious question.
Right. You feel foolish for not already knowing the answer, but you absolutely cannot move forward without it. Before we look at how to ask those questions, we have to banish the toxic habits we fall back on when we feel insecure.
Oh, you mean the verbal tics that actively erode our authority?
Exactly. The absolute worst offender is starting a sentence with, maybe it's just me, but...
Yes.
When you start your question that way, you are issuing a preemptive apology for your own curiosity. You're instructing the room to dismiss your thought before you have even finished articulating it.
That's a terrible habit.
And the second phrase we have to eliminate is, this might be a stupid question, but... I mean, you are literally taking the word stupid and stapling it to your own professional identity.
It is real-time self-sabotage, and it's driven entirely by a fear of judgment.
So to replace those habits, Marcus and Zara suggest naming the risk directly to strip it of its power.
Okay, how do they do that?
You say, I want to ask what might be an obvious question, but I think it's worth making sure we're explicit about it.
Oh, that is an exceptional framing technique.
Isn't it?
Yeah, because by acknowledging up front that the answer might be obvious to everyone else, you completely neutralize the threat of looking slow.
Yeah.
And the psychological effect on the room is immediate. People lean in. They internally ask themselves, wait, is this obvious? Do I actually know the answer to this?
Right, because usually half the room doesn't know the answer either.
Exactly. You have elevated the gravity of a basic question, forcing the room to pause and ensure foundational alignment.
You take the weapon right out of the room's hands. Okay. Now, you have asked your brilliant questions, you have navigated the contradictions, and the meeting is finally winding down.
Finally.
How do you close the loop to ensure you don't end up in Zara's wordly mapping nightmare?
That's the critical final step.
Right. Instead of saying a generic, okay, got it, which leaves zero paper trail of your actual comprehension, you use this final phrase. That's helpful. Let me reflect that back to make sure I've understood correctly.
Okay, but the phrase itself is just a polite setup, right? The magic lies entirely in what you do next. You must follow that phrase with a synthesis in your own words.
Not just repeating what they said.
No, parroting their exact phrasing back to them only proves that your ears function. Synthesis proves that your brain is actively processing the material.
And the strategic brilliance of the synthesis is that it acts as an invisible trap for errors.
Yes.
If your summary of the deliverables is even slightly misaligned with what the presenter intended, their natural instinct will be to immediately interrupt and correct you. So you've successfully forced them to clarify the most complex parts of the project without you ever having to ask them for help or admit you were confused.
You architect a scenario where they gladly offer you the exact clarity you need, believing they're simply fine-tuning a highly engaged colleague's notes. It's brilliant.
So what does this all mean? When we synthesize all the tactics Marcus and Zara lay out, the core takeaway is a radical shift in perspective. Asking questions is not a vulnerability to be hidden. It is the fundamental tool of effective leadership.
Absolutely.
When you replace defensive, ego-driven language with analytical, collaborative framing, you aren't just surviving a confusing meeting, you are actively engineering clarity for the entire room. So here is your challenge for the upcoming work week. The next time you find yourself entirely lost in a meeting, do not touch that emergency brake.
Pump the brakes on the emergency brake.
Exactly. Swap out just one "I don't understand" with "Can you help me understand the thinking behind that?" And just watch how instantly the defensive posture of the room melts away.
As you implement that change, this raises an important question, one that sits a layer deeper than the tactical communication we've explored today.
Oh, what is that?
Well, we've spent this entire deep dive analyzing how changing your vocabulary prevents others from doubting your competence. We've focused on managing the external perception of your leadership.
Right.
But consider the internal mechanism at play here. When you deliberately drop the apologetic language, when you permanently banish the "maybe it's just me's" and the stupid questions from your vocabulary, how profoundly does that alter how you perceive yourself?
Oh, wow.
When you stop apologizing for your own intellectual curiosity, how quickly does that reframe your own deeply held belief about your fundamental right to be sitting in that room in the first place?
Man, that is a phenomenal thought to leave on. The vocabulary we choose doesn't just dictate how the room treats us, it dictates how much space we allow ourselves to take up.
Perfectly said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking those precise questions. Keep exploring the hidden mechanics of how we communicate every single day, and we'll see you next time.